There was, I think, a strange beauty to it. The end of thought, as the daring edges of daily dreams fell into harsh contact with the delicate reality of things. We had run for our lives, gathering our senses and our meagre belongings, and tried to escape from the men who stalked the streets, with steel in their hands and in their hearts. We were to be punished, brought below and fed to the thing that dwelt there, waiting. We had lived our whole lives here, generations in eager ignorance of its presence, and they had found it within hours. Had we not been vicious enough to warrant its attentions? Had it called to them as soon as they climbed the walls and slipped into the streets? Had it led them down into the dark, or had they wandered to it by chance? Was it little more than misfortune that doomed us all? Hearts open to hatred and eager for slaughter, it had knocked upon the doors of their minds as blood-drenched cobble and flesh was rended, and yet, before they could even lead more of us down, their work was done, and it had swallowed that which was offered, and the world as we had always known it would begin its slow and torturous death. There came a rumbling, slight at first, a soft vibration as if the mud and stone and clay of the earth was purring like a great beast, strangely gentle yet terrifying. We stood around and looked at each other, captives and captor, twinned in confusion. And then a terrible screeching. The screeching sounded like nothing that was natural, and reverberated as if bouncing from great walls of rock and stone, and the tremors beneath our feet grew more fierce, and the streets were a bucking beast trying to throw us from its back and break our bones in vengeance for its capture. This land was not created for cobbles, nor foundations, nor the hopes of men, it said. Suddenly, from the centre of the town, near the holiest of places, the ground exploded upward, and rising from within, like a massive seeking talon or the horn of a great beast, a gigantic spire rose into the sky. It was built of blood-red marble and obsidian black basalt, knotting together and round each other in an intricate weave. Between the layers ran white and gold metals, and all around them swirled smoke and ash. The smell was acrid, and while I shut my eyes against the searing heat that sprang from it, I somehow could still see the spire, and through some sorcery did the details of it arrive into my mind. It continued to rise up into the sky, thin and sharp at the top, and growing wider as it emerged from the earth like some form of enormous creature, until it towered above us like a thin sliver of a mountain, where all the rest had been chopped away by the hands of some great beast. From the surface of the spire there suddenly came 10,000 chains that ended with wicked hooks and crooked barbs, and each one did pierce the chest of a man and a woman, or a child or a beast. All of us were caught straight through the heart, yet not one of us died. People of every faith, every creed, and the invader alongside us were wrenched upward into the sky, like fish pulled from the calm of the water and smashed against the deck of some terrible ship. Pulled tight against the surface of the spire, we covered it from foot to crown, and then did the most terrible of changes begin. I could feel a tingle in my flesh, turning rapidly to itching and to burning and to agony, as the meat of my body and the hardness of my bones began to soften, to run across the surface of the spire, to meet and mesh with the molten flesh of my fellows. Where the flesh of myself poured over and around and under that of others could I feel their pain and their fear, and it echoed and amplified my own. Although our mouths were long gone, melted away into the fleshy, formless, shapeless skin that we were becoming on the spire, I could hear the screaming of 10,000 voices, and I knew that mine was just one amongst the maelstrom. From high atop my tower of pain, as my flesh melted and moulded and reknit itself to a whim that was not my own, as thousands more screamed with me, I looked down and saw a sight even more sickening than I could have imagined. There below, far below, a millennia away but feeling close enough to touch, were the plains of hell. Lakes of burning pitch and impossibly shaped towers, mountains with storms atop them that could wipe out a city, and massive hordes of roaming beasts that living man was never meant to see. Cracks in the earth exposed a warren of caves, rooms and substructures, bustling and heaving with the business of torture and condemnation. Cities rose above the plains like sickly tumours growing upon the face of a corpse, and endless armies marched towards each other, or fought savagely in the valleys and the mountains. Enormous monsters roared their violent calls, or keened their mournful death rattles, as even greater abominations pierced their flesh with talons and claws and teeth and stingers, and made meat of them and danced amidst their blood. As I stared down in horror, I saw below a spire like my own prison, but rising up above the blasted plains of hell, identical in every way from the pluming, swirling smoke to the gentle, delicate weaves of red marble and black basalt that made its bones. With great horror I realised, pinned to this second spire, deep within the bowels of hell, another me writhed and flowed and joined his fellows upon the caustic, sickly surface of it. My soul, the illustrious weight of my eternity, already damned for how long I did not know. The shadow of myself, the grid of all my sin, and the clay of my weakness, and the water of my greed and hate and lust had all formed here, eager to meet the rest of me. Loosened from whatever grip hell had on it, it bubbled up and took its place on the twin throne of pain that my own life had brought me. Without eyes, I stared across the gulf and into myself, and I knew that I was damned, that all was pain. This swirling vortex of agony that I was now a part of was just the start, little more than a grain of sand on the marching dune. And suddenly, with a sickening, a rending, tearing, and a wrenching as if the earth itself had torn in two, did the spire above spin downward, and the spire below dance upward, and somehow they seemed to leave behind shadows of themselves. We were dragged into hell, and I could feel it like a plunge beneath icy water, the moment we crossed the threshold from one unto the other, and I was lost forever to God's cleansing light. Our other selves were dragged up to earth as we were brought down to damnation, and between the two spires, now crossing both planes and looking as a spear with a tip on each end, held fast in the granite tip of the earth, did a fine red shimmer appear. Suddenly, as before had the single spire become two with my realization, now did the two become four in actuality, forming somehow the same set of twins in the two planes, in the physical and in the realm of the soul, and joined together through pain and suffering, through what was and what will be. Through dread happenstance and eager treachery did they form a gate. Across the fine red shimmer the disgusting black arteries form, pumping a vile liquid filled with heathen magics, rancid milk and clotted blood, an umbilical to give the gift of life to the end of the world. It grew between the now two great pillars, down into hell and up into the earth, a craven and vile warren of flesh and tissue. On the side of hell that I see shock and surprise and then growing delight at all this, and a great buzzing filled the sky as 100 and then 1,000 and then 100,000 pairs of wings did somehow carry horse-like forms to the foot of the gate. Crowns of burnished gold sat upon their malformed human faces and were wrapped in sickly flames, and iron breastplates covered where their vile hearts would be, protecting them from my own burning hatred. They howled and bucked and killed each other in their impatience, and eventually they set upon the meat of the gate like vile maggots, chewing and rending and tearing at it with their long claws and their stingers. Those at the front were caught between the thick fleshy gate and the masses behind, and were hacked apart and chewed to pieces, joining the slop and charnel waste of the gate as it fell to the cracked black ground. Eventually the first ones cut their way through, and my terror was complete as they spilled out into the holy place, and they howled in victory and ran amok, desperate for murder and destruction. The meat of the gate began to cook, a terrible stink, and a rancid aroma that filled the air, and with deep disgust did I realize that part of the awful smell was my own twisted form cooking on the vile stone of the spire. As the flying things poured through the gate, both spires caught fire. The flames were deep and intense, reaching out between the pillars and forming arches and swirls in shapes that I had never seen before, complex runes and glyphs that scratched at my sanity and filled me with disgust and fear. Before long, they burned away, leaving the massive stone spires aflame, but with the space between them turbulent and murky. All around the newly formed gate, the ground burned. The city below melted away, obliterated by the heat which seemed to creep ever outward, and I knew that night would never again touch this now unholy place. There would be only the fire and the fumes, and the ravaging hordes that spilled forth like the sickly afterbirth of our great failings. We who had not defended our walls, and they who had not defended their hearts. Our failure complete, I sank deep into nothingness, and awaited the horrors that called to me from the endless dark.